Okay, so please come with you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Anita. I wear many hats. I consider my role as a wife and a mom my most important roles in life. But beyond that, by profession, I'm a public policy analyst. I'm a coach. I run my own coaching platform. I'm an advocate against sexual violence, and I advocate for mental health as well. I mentor women and teenagers, and I'm also a sexual violence or sexual abuse survivor. And I think for the purpose of why we're here, that is probably the key thing that applies.
Okay, so you said you're a sexual abuse survivor. So can you let us into this?
Okay, so there's this whole spectrum of sexual violence. Within that, there's sexual harassment, molestation, referring to child sexual abuse, really. And for me, that was what it was. Child sexual abuse really is any form of sexual abuse done to a child, and typically that will be anybody under the age of 18. So for me, it was between the ages of 7 and 17. I had experienced, different forms of abuse from different parties in that time frame. That was what it was really for me. So we're talking about like a decade of exposure, to child sexual abuse. It started when I was 7, and then it ended when I was, or the last one, as it were, in my non-adult life was when I was 17. And those were the heaviest periods.
7, so are you saying that you were in nursery primary school or in Montessori school? How did it happen?
So yes, at 7 I was actually in primary 4 already, and by primary 5 I was 8 and I was already done primary school or elementary school, as some would call it. So I was that's pretty young. So by we I mean there was a cousin of mine and we had a lesson teacher that was coming to the house, a private tutor that was coming into the house to teach us after school hours. And I remember walking in on him having my cousin just stroke him one day, and from there he kind of threatened. He was threatening her, as I later learned, and kind of threatened and said if we ever told anyone, they would beat us, they would do this to us, and we might die, and things like. For a 7-year-old brain, that's a lot to process. And I was living with an auntie who at the time beat me at the slightest of things. So when he said you'll get beaten, for me, I knew that it probably wasn't a threat. It was likely to happen. At least that's what I thought anyway, right, at the time. So that's really where it started.
Okay. You've mentioned then that you were sexually abused at age 7, and then it actually happened with a tutor who was to take you on tutorials about your school academics, so to say. So around which area does this happen? Perhaps it's maybe what contributed to.
Okay, yeah, so to maybe help you even understand that, I'll just give you a little background on how, because like I mentioned, I was living with an auntie, right, and how that happened. I wasn't there, so I don't know, but my parents were not exactly together, but they had me, and I have an older brother as well, and I think there were family issues that were ongoing. Long story short is I ended up living with my paternal grandparents, and the gist was that I was being pampered too much, and this auntie of mine thought I needed some discipline in my life, and I was taken to live with her in Abuja. So I left Lagos for Abuja to live with her. But then she works, and she works from morning till evening. I go to school, I come back, I do my chores, I'm home alone, and same with my cousin and I, and we'll spend the afternoon together and have this private tutor come in and teach us. But I mean, because he knew that there was no adults in the house, you know, it was just both of us most of the time. I mean, sometimes maybe a neighbor will come in and knock just to check in on us and all that, but he also knew what to expect, right? If they come, they'll knock, so he can quickly just put himself back together and all that. And so that was what was happening. So I feel like the lack of parental presence in that sense, you know, contributed to that. Not to say that there are people who don't get abused when their parents are there, and I don't mean parental in terms of my parents not being there per se, but in terms of, you know, there was no adult supervising. We're just trusted with a random stranger. I mean, who was this guy? You know, we're just trusted with a random stranger, and that's a very vulnerable place to put a child, because you don't know who this guy is. You're not putting any form of checks and balances. There's no CCTV cameras in the house that you're monitoring. The neighbors are not coming in randomly through a secret door where he knows that anybody can come in at any time, and that, you know, checks him, right? So I think that really contributed to it.
Okay, you said this abuse actually happened in age span of a decade, so 10 years, so between age 7 to 17. So do you have other people who took advantage of this, and then how did it happen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with the lesson teacher, I think that lasted maybe for as long as he was our tutor. And if I remember correctly, maybe just a couple months was what he lasted. And then there was break. So it wasn't like it was every single day of those 10 years something was happening per se. But over that 10 years, there were a number of things that happened, and some, of course, lasted more than others, right? And so I think the next one I remember, I was 11 at the time, and there was a guy still in Abuja actually. Now at this point when I was 11, I had left Abuja. I've left my auntie to live with my father, because I know that I'm smiling when I'm saying this, because to most Nigerians, the kind of experience I had there was discipline. But quite frankly, children are not stupid. A child knows when you've crossed the line of discipline to child abuse, and I'm speaking physical abuse, physical and emotional abuse now, including maybe even verbal abuse, you know. And that was what was going on, and I think my father had gotten wind of it and wanted me to come live with him instead. And so he had taken me to live with him. But this is, you know, this was his older sister we're talking about, and someone I lived with. I mean, it wasn't always all that bad, to be honest, you know. And so I went back for holidays, and before I left, even I knew of this guy, you know, within our area that was very notorious for abusing children sexually. I mean, us kids knew what he was doing to some of our peers, but I don't think, for me, I watched some of the adults who, when they found out, maybe their words told them, this man did this to me. I watched some of them beat up their children, called them names, called them spoils. In fact, there was a particular girl, this case that I remember, I think he impregnated her even. Of course, she's a child. She was, what, how old? You know, and she was beaten and called names, and, you know, I remember just watching all that experience thinking, oh my, if I ever voice out that this happened to me, this is exactly what's going to happen. So it made sense to just keep it to yourself. Don't tell anybody.
So particularly you're afraid of being disciplined
for being abused, which is very pathetic when you think about it, you know. And so and then sometimes parents knew, and this is how I know parents knew, or people around knew what was going on, is the way the houses are in Abuja. If anybody knows, like Gwagwalada area in Abuja, the houses they're just structured in such a way, they're like in rows and they're all similar. And if you're going past this man's, there are two ways that sometimes if you're walking through, People will tell you avoid the place where you are either directly in front of his house, and sometimes like there's a stairs and people sit out in front of their houses or at the back. So the structure is the same. And they'll tell you avoid this guy's house. Why are they telling us to avoid his house? Right? Because things are happening to people who go past there. Sometimes, I've heard stories of that he practically just grab a girl, take her into his house, and rape her. And things like that were happening, but nobody was calling this man to order.
And no one was bold enough to challenge him or,
as
an attempt to say this guy should be apprehended.
For as long as I could remember, nobody did. Nobody. Because again, like I said, I lived there between ages 6, going on 7, and about 10 or 11, 10, really 10, and in that time, I don't remember anybody doing anything. And by the time I went for holidays when I was about 11 or so, 12, by the time I went back for holidays, 11, I remember just going through one time and he said, hey, should you come? I have a message for your auntie. And that was and I mean, thinking about it now, looking back, it was like, wow, stupid me, why would I have done that, but my child brain, took him seriously and thought maybe he really does have something for her. And I mean, he was holding a bag, right? And I should have known because all he had was a towel around, and I actually went, and that particular experience, for instance, was very embarrassing. Still is, honestly, when I think about it, because when you cast your mind back, so many things around the scenario pointed that this guy was up to something. And statistics show that, about I think 75%, maybe 9% of people who of abusers were known by, or perpetrators were known by the abused. So it's not strangers we're talking about. It's your next door neighbor, it's your friend, it's your cousin, it's your father, it's your stepfather, it's your brother. These are the people that you know. And I went, and I don't know what happened, but one thing led to another. All I knew was this man was on me, and when he was done, he just threw some money at me and said, here, buy yourself something. I remember just walking home in shame and feeling very defeated, and I just walked home and I went straight to the bathroom and I sat there and I kept scrubbing my body and that was what I did. But I never told anybody that, right?
Okay. I was going to ask, so did you attempt to inform anyone about
in that instance, in that one particular, no. Exactly, because I'd seen him, heard of him, not just heard of him. I know people that he had done that to, kids, especially kids, right? That he had done that to. And to think that, at the time, you thought, how could you let that happen to you? And then now it happened to me. It was really embarrassing, to say the least. To say, how did I even get here? And that was what happened, and that was the second experience. Sadly enough, the third and the fourth followed right after that. I finished my holidays, went back home to Warri. My father was living in Warri, Delta State. Went back home, and then we had a very good relationship with a landlord there, and my dad was alone at the time I was living with him. My older brother was still with my grandparents, and so sometimes he traveled for work, and when he travels for work, I'll stay with the landlord and the family. And I mean, this guy had like kids about my age, 2 daughters, so we're good friends. They were my friends, we're good friends, but it didn't take long before he started having some very brilliant ideas. In the world of sexual violence, there's something they call revictimization. And revictimization really is that the likelihood that if someone had been abused before, they're likely to get abused repeatedly again. And with each abuse, you tend to feel more and more like it's your fault. Like you are the one doing something to make it happen. And so when he started doing his own thing, at that point, I remember even asking myself, like, what is it about me is there something in me that maybe I'm, giving up a vibe to this man that I'm not realizing? I started questioning myself in that regard, and at night he'll come, touch me, do stuff, go back, make me touch him and all of that. And it was really sad, to say the least. And then that was going on, but I mean, I was really angry because you have kids my age. They're girls like me. Why are you doing this? And those were the questions that I started having in my head. And in his own case, for some reason, that made me so angry. I mean, the first two people, they don't have kids, at least not that I know of. So if they don't have and they don't know what it feels like to have a child, it made sense that they would want to hurt a child. But you have children and girls.
So in this time that because of what he was doing and you feel angry, so does the anger not trigger anything to say, "Oh, let me even hurt this person because I don't like what he was going to do to me or what he's doing to me"?
So the thing is that even if it did at the time, no, because we all tend to react to these things differently, right? Some people go through experiences like that, and they start to experience behavioral changes. It can be violent, or it can go the other extreme. I'm a very outspoken person. If there was one child in the room who was talking, it was always me. If there was one child who, if I mean, even in my adult life, no matter how boring a place is, if I show up, unless I choose not to, which hardly ever happens, I will light up the room. I'm that kind of person, and I was like that as a child. But then I started to withdraw to myself. I spoke less and less, and those were my behavioral changes, right? And that was how my system chose to react to the experience. I don't control that. So instead of maybe extreme violent behavior like some other people would have, mine drove me to an extreme where I went into a shell. And I mean, if I'm with my friends and classmates, I'm still like my jovial self. But in general settings, especially where they're adults, I became just a quiet person. And I had people make comments around, I know you're not this quiet. Why are you being, why you don't talk anymore? This is what's going on. But nobody really dug in enough to find out.
So do you have anyone that perhaps was a confidant that you could, probably have related this with, even without, opening up to every other person to say, "Oh, this is the issue," and the likes? For every child or every teenager, we always have someone we can confide in and we can, pour our minds to and do a whole lot of this.
Unfortunately not. Yeah. And it's very unfortunate, really. And it's one of the reasons why today I work with teenagers, because I know what it feels like to go through something and you can't even find one adult you can trust enough to go to with that information. So remember how I said I'd watched other kids get beaten for trying to report molestation and child sexual abuse, and even in some cases rape. And that does something to your own mind. And in addition to that, like I said, my father and I were living alone. My father had a cousin who was living with him, and the man had his wife and kids. And she had I can't remember if it was her own family member or her husband's family member who's about my age living with her. And I saw how she treated this girl. I saw how the men who often would stay with them for work or whatever, or visited them, they were abusing this girl right under this woman's nose, and she didn't even know. And I mean, sexually abusing this girl, and this woman did not know. And the one time she eventually found out, she sent her packing and called her name. So again, I saw that play out again. So I figured, nah, not you. My father at the time was seeing a woman that he was thinking to marry, and she saw me as a competition instead, right? So I'm an only daughter, and if there's one thing most fathers do is dot on their daughters. Especially when you now have, more than one other male child and then you have just one girl, So I was like a competition. So of course that was a no-go area either. Now, funny thing is that the landlord's wife was my confidant before that started happening. If there was one person who came close to it, it was her. But now it's her husband doing this to me. How do I go and tell her, I want to confide in you about an experience? Oh, by the way, it's your husband. I couldn't bring myself to do that. I started going to a church. I changed churches. I was going to church with them, and then I changed churches. And within the church setting in itself, sometimes I saw how they treated like some of the older ladies, and it was just it didn't feel right for me. So I was practically just in this alone and just dealing with it. I was thinking to eventually, just tell my dad. Like, I mean, he's my father, he'll understand and open up to him, right? And I wanted to do that. But unfortunately, while I was still trying to muster up the courage to do that, he started his. And I remember the first day that he came to my room. I mean, he was drunk. He was drunk when it started, you know? And I said to myself, you know what, it's fine. He had a little too much to drink. There were friends around, and they were saying certain things that day, and it started out like a dare. They had dared him to, in their words, squeeze your daughter, and, they were just making some men jokes that were drunk men jokes. And so I excused it and said he was drunk. Oh, in the morning, he'll come back and be like, oh my God, what did I do? I'm so sorry. We'll forget about it. We'll move and now tell him, oh, by the way, the landlord was doing this to me. At least he wasn't drunk. And I avoided going to his house, right? But sometimes he'll find creative ways of, he meets you, along the same path. Nobody's watching. He's squeezing your breast. Things like that were happening, right? And so I was thinking, okay. But then the next morning came. He was clear-eyed. And I walked past because I was very angry. I didn't greet him. I didn't do anything. I was very angry, and okay, by the way, at this point, my brother has started living with us actually, because all of this, I'm telling you, we're talking about like a year or two that passed, And my brother has started living with us at this time. I woke up the next morning. I refused to greet my father, and my brother thought it was odd that I didn't greet him and my father didn't make a fuss. I mean, what Nigerian parents would not? Your child wakes up in the morning, they don't greet you, and you let it pass. You're not even angry about it. I mean, something is up, But when I didn't greet him, I remember he said, he just said, hey, you come and take something. Come and take this out of my room. It's normal. The parents is sending you an errand. I didn't want to go, and I stood almost frozen close to the door, and I was like, I'm not going in. He said, come on, take this thing, and what? Am I going to eat you? And I went in. But it was, of course, it was a decoy. And I thought that was the apology that was going to come. We wanted to maybe, let's talk about this in private. But then he started squeezing me again. And he said,
At that point, he wasn't drunk.
No, he wasn't drunk. This was in the morning. So you couldn't have been drunk overnight till morning. And then he said, what is wrong with you? Is it just ordinary? I'm not doing anything major. It's just once in a while, let me just touch you. And I was so confused, And all of a sudden, the landlord seemed like a very good person to me. So yeah. I think at this point I was 13. My father eventually died when I was 16, which in itself was another traumatic experience and tragedy.
You said your mom and your dad were not living together. So did they divorce or?
No, they were never even. I think that they were never even married to begin with. They weren't married to begin with.
So were you the only child of your mother to your father?
No, I have a younger brother. I had 2 younger brothers.
So when you say they were never married to?
Oh yeah, you don't want to know. That's a whole story for another day. If I have to write a book again, that would probably be it. But anyway, no, that's their story. They're not here to tell it. I'm not going to tell it for them. I can only talk about how that story impacted my own life, at least from my perspective, right? And I talked about that a little bit in the book and how I thought it fed into those experiences. But no, they were never married. They were family issues, so they never even made it to marriage to begin with. But then they had me. Somehow they were trying to make it work over the years. Had my brother trying to make it work over the years. Had my youngest brother who unfortunately passed away when he was 9 years old, about 11 years ago now, or 12, 11 years ago now. Yeah, thanks. But he was, so no, they weren't exactly together. So my mom lived with my younger brother, my dad lived with me, and then I have a half older brother who we grew up together. That was who we grew up together with my grandparents, and then eventually started living with my dad.
So trying to see what could have led to this sexual abuse between the father to the daughter. So perhaps maybe it was could we say it was due to the cultural issues or to the family issues, just like you mentioned, that they didn't allow them to get married and then resulted to all of this.
So it's one question that even me had asked myself. Unfortunately, he's not here to answer it for himself. Because, and not just even for him, but even for all the other men, not just for them, but even for any man who has anyone practically, because women abuse, women sexually abused too, you know. But for anyone who has abused a child, the question that I've always asked is like, well, what was going on in your mind? You know, who looks at a child and says sexually appealing? I mean, it's kids. Have you met them? You know, and but I know one thing, that there are so many things that, you know, from my experience and all these different men and things that how I when I think back about how they started for some of them, you know, especially the ones that were living in um especially the ones that were living in experiences, right, where you're living with the abuser over a period of time. I found that for some people, it's that maybe they had some form of addiction of their own that they never checked, right? And when you have addictions like pornography, masturbation, things like that, it's only a matter of time before you're no longer satisfied at that level and you want more. And unfortunately, in and of themselves, I don't care how much the world tries to normalize, you know, masturbation and pornography. It is perversion. And perversion only breeds more perversion. It's only a matter of time. You're no longer satisfied at that level. You want more. You know, and sometimes the more you indulge in those things, when your body wants it, and because at the core of it it's a problem of lack of discipline. It's a problem of lack of self-discipline, right? So for someone who is already lacking in sexual discipline, and all of a sudden you feel like, I want to do this, right? And you don't feel comfortable with yourself alone anymore. When there's somebody sitting across you and you realize, oh, there's nobody else here, what can I do? All of a sudden the environment, the conditions seems right to do something. You now want to take advantage, right? And so some people do that. For some others, I know that there's some, you know, maybe occultic components to it, where they've been told you have to sleep with a child to do whatever. And for some people, it's that, you know, there are people who, and then this is where, for me, it really just baffles me, because I hear now that people who are pedophiles are fighting for their right of sexual preferences to sleep with children. I mean, that's just as sick as the world can get, you know, because you can't come and tell me your preference is a child. What does that even mean? The child's body is not even fully developed, biologically speaking. How is that appealing? Nobody wants to eat an unripe fruit.
Okay, so,
you know, so things like that.
Okay, so you shared so much, but then I'm looking at how did all of these, with your emotions, and how were you able to, scale? Then was there, would you say it was due to maybe the environment, for example, or you say it's societal? Because we're still coming back to, okay, how did did you go through any therapy to get out of all of these, and then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let me answer the first one about, was it more societal or the environment or culture? It's a lot of things, including things like, first things first, we don't even, culturally and as a people, sex is a taboo topic in and of itself. I remember when I was 14, I liked putting, raw salt in my cooked food. And I was putting salt in my food one time, and my grandmother said, I was 14, and my grandmother said, that's too much salt you're having. 3 S's that are not good for your health, that are not good for you, and And she said sugar, salt, and the third one, something that you don't need to know about at this age. I was 14. So remember I told you by that age, how many men had already, molested me, right? And you're here trying to code sex from me at 14. And I said, oh, you mean sex? And I already was like, oh, And in my mind, I was just laughing like, please, been there, done that. Not even by choice, unfortunately, right? That's how much sex is a taboo topic to us. And that in itself is a problem. I'm not saying sit a child down and tell them how to have sex. I'm saying sit a child down and teach them these are your body parts. These parts are private, meaning nobody should touch them. Even my kids, I tell them, mommy and daddy too don't have rights to touch you. If we are bathing you, you poo, we're cleaning you, that's a different ballgame. But even while we are cleaning you, there's nothing like, oh, what is this? We're not doing that. So that's part of we don't teach our children. We were not taught, at least I wasn't taught anyway. But culturally, we don't even do that. So there's that piece. There's the part where, especially when it comes to, girls, statistics show that, 1 in 4 girls in Nigeria have experienced, molestation, sexual abuse of some sort. For boys, that's 1 in 9. And that's pretty high when you think about it. And so the ratio for girls to boys is also wide too. Especially when it comes to girls, the way we culturally and religiously perceive women is part of that problem. When we think that a woman is, there's a part where we objectify women. There's also the part where we feel like, when you tell a woman like a woman a woman is supposed to, serve the man without putting context to who that man is. It's not every man out there on the streets, right? So things like that, unfortunately, add to the problem. There's also the part where we now even don't educate ourselves. It's one thing to be ignorant about something. It's another thing to choose to remain ignorant about it. And that's why, so I blog about this, and, my blog page, loudsilences.org. That's why I don't just share stories or talk about, things that have happened in that. I also share educational things. It's why, I like organizations that I partner and work with, because they teach people, they teach the, kids how to behave, how to learn, how to protect themselves, how to set healthy boundaries. But they also teach the public about, you see something not right with a child, don't just keep quiet and say, well, not my problem, not my child. Talk about it. Questions like, oh, what were you wearing? Why did you go to his house? And like the guy at 11, right? That was my concern was, I went to his house. How do I explain to anybody that, the way we interpret it will be, now you go find out now. Wait till you find good there when you say, that's what it be. That's how we talk about it. I hear all the stories of every case, that comes out about, and I mean like cases that have made like, social media sensations or media sensations. We blame the girls. We blame the women. What were you wearing? Why did you go there? Why did you say that? And those things haven't been helpful. You've only empowered the perpetrator and re-victimized the victim. And now you're not even taking that, even the few that have been able to speak up, you re-victimize them by saying that they were the problem.